There we go. All right, so I'm just going to give a brief introduction of everybody on our panel here, and then we're going to be, unless anyone has any objections, we're going to be going alphabetical. So I believe that will be Badireddy, Scarborough, and then Wolf. And before you begin your presentation, I'll give a slightly more in-depth presentation. I discovered last time that Google Meet only records the person who's talking's face. So the first 5 minutes of the last panel are only my face talking a lot. So we're breaking that up this time. So just a brief introduction to our esteemed guests. We have Dr. Do you prefer Apala Raju Badireddy or just Dr. Badireddy or anything like that?
That's Dr. Badireddy is
All
fine.
right, we have Dr. Badireddy, who is a assistant professor with the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at University of Vermont, and he is focusing on water and wastewater treatment as well as resource recovery. We have Dr. Scarborough, who is also an assistant professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at UVM, and his research is in the application of microbiomes to protect the natural environment as well as public health. And we have Dr. Kristen Wolf, who is an associate professor in the core division at Champlain College. Her research focuses on environmental ethics, science and society, globalization, as well as the Amazon River Basin. And so now I'll go a little bit more in depth on Dr. Badireddy. His areas of expertise also include environment and public health, as well as climate change and hazard mitigation. His research also covers environmental nanotechnology with a focus on applications and implications of engineered nanomaterials, and his latest projects are studies on the fate and transport of PFAS in environmental systems. So whenever you're ready, do you want to try to open up your presentation on your end, or
Yeah,
should I?
I will try to open it here. Uh, mm. Can you see my screen? Can you all see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. All right. Thanks, Kelsey, for your kind introduction. It's an honor to be on this panel. So today I want to discuss about ensuring water security through innovative membrane and nanotechnologies. In this presentation, I'm going to touch upon water security, water energy food nexus, water reuse, and then I will talk about some of the work that we are doing in the areas of membrane and nanotechnology systems, kind of talk about challenges and opportunities, and some snapshot of results and some conclusions. Okay. So security, according to United Nations Water Report, the definition is it's the capacity of a population to safeguard sustainable access to adequate quantities of acceptable quality water for sustaining livelihoods, human well-being, and socio-economic development, ensuring protection against waterborne pollution and water-related disasters, and preserving ecosystems in a climate of peace and political stability. So the current population of the planet is about 7.8 billion people. And now there are about 1.1 billion people lack access to clean drinking water. About 1.3 billion people don't have access to proper electricity. And about 1.02 billion people don't have access to adequate amount of food. It is projected that by 2050, the population will be about 9.7 billion people on the planet. What this means is there will be about 30% more demand for clean drinking water, 40% more demand for energy, 50% more demand for food. Where we will get this increased demand? How can we get it? Right? That's the question. But if you think about these water, energy, food, they are not independent entities. They are interrelated, interconnected with each other. The changes in one will affect the changes in other, and so on. Um, for example, It takes about 108 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of corn. And by 2030, we will be using 10% of the croplands to produce biofuel crops. If you think about it, if you look at this chart, this shows like our water footprint that goes into producing know, our food. How much water does it take to produce these different kinds of food and so on? So every morning we drink coffee, for example. To produce 1 cup of coffee, it takes about we spend about 140 liters of water. To produce 1 kilogram or 2 pounds of corn, we spend about 900 liters of water. To produce 1 kilogram of beef, we spend 15,000 liters of water. And so there is a direct connection. We need water to produce processed food and so on. And behind this there is also energy component involved. So the energy, water, energy, food, they are interconnected. In the United States, 13% of total electricity consumption goes into water distribution, water heating, and water treatment. But if we don't recognize this interconnectedness, unsustainable practice, it will lead to more waste generation. And the biofuel crops or biofuels would be needing about 20 times more water than the gasoline per mile covered. And these unsustainable practices also increase food prices. It will also increase greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. There are so many problems. But if we recognize this interconnectedness between water, energy, and food, then if we think about in terms of nexus thinking, it will also encourage the global thinking. So solving water security issues also solves food and energy security issues elsewhere. So now the another big question is, are all the parts of this nexus equal? No. The water security is the key component here that drives everything on this planet. So the reason is, if you think about it, water is not substitutable or replaceable. We cannot create water or grow more water. Water is the least considered part of the nexus. And for our food production and so on, and for various purposes, we are extracting groundwater at a much faster rate than it can be replaced. For example, like 25% more withdrawal is happening in China every day, 56% of water withdrawal in India. Currently, there are over 700 million people live in water-stressed regions. And this number will go up to 3 billion people in just about 10 years from now. Some estimates have shown that on every day, about 3,500 gallons of water per megawatt hour evaporate from hydroelectric dam. 50% of nitrogen in fertilizers run off into the rivers. If we carry on as we are, our problems will only increase. So here you can see these are all the problems if we don't recognize the interconnectedness between water, energy, and food. Inefficient energy production, increased groundwater abstraction, food wastage, and so on. But if we recognize this interconnectedness and with this nexus thinking, we can reduce food waste, we can adopt drip irrigation, wind power. There are so many benefits that come out of this nexus thinking. We all know right now that water quality and scarcity are a global challenge. Recently, National Geographic magazine did an article on water calling it Our Thirsty World. Times magazine called water the new oil. We are in the midst of a global freshwater crisis, and unless we address it, water will run out of it. So there will be more demand for water, more demand for energy, more demand for food, and so on. So how can we get that? So how do we increase this available water supply? So currently what we are doing is we are using the water, whatever is available to us through the hydrological cycle. For the past few decades, we have been doing water conservation, repair of infrastructure, improved catchment and distribution, and so on. But these practices only improve water use. They do not increase water supply. The only way we can increase the water supply is by reusing our wastewaters, making the water and wastewater treatment more efficient, and also making the desalination processes more sustainable and cost effective. So what can we do? What advanced technologies are available to increase this water supply? In my opinion, these three technologies are available to increase the water membrane technologies. There are a variety of membrane processes that we can use to clean water, to purify water, treat water. There is also nanotechnology rapidly emerging. We can take advantage of this technology to improve existing treatment processes or create new treatment processes. And there is environmental biotechnology, which can be used to, for recovering potable waters from wastewaters, remediate polluted waters or environmental systems, and so on. Water reuse, there's no doubt it is extremely crucial. Recently, National Academy of Engineers has put out this report on water reuse, calling for the potential for expanding the nation's water supply through reuse of municipal wastewater. There are several examples where they use reuse wastewaters. For example, Singapore, 30% of their drinking water comes from their wastewater reuse. Orange County, California. There, the treated wastewaters are pumped back into the ground to recharge the groundwater resources through centers like groundwater replenishment systems and so on, so that the downstream the drinking water treatment plants can extract and treat it to produce drinking water again. So there are several examples around the world where they started to increasingly reuse our wastewaters to produce potable water or reusable waters. And this is where the membrane technologies can play a huge role. We can also produce reusable waters from secondary effluent, that's like a treated wastewater. So if we can send the treated wastewater through this membrane bioreactor, we can produce reusable water, which can be used for irrigation, watering the gardens, or in the power plant, and so on. But if we want to produce potable water from this reusable water, we can divert the stream into a disinfected, potable water. So then we have access to clean water. But the big problem with these membrane systems is fouling. These are filters with pores. When we filter these highly complex waters, wastewaters, the pores of these membranes clog. And when they clog, then we have to apply more pressure to push water through these filters. More pressure means we have to spend more electricity. More electricity means more fossil fuel combustion. More fossil fuel combustion means more greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. So right now, this is a very expensive, not a very sustainable treatment process. So these systems currently they involve huge amount of energy and also cost. So our focus is right now is on decreasing the energy used in these kind of systems. So how can we do that? One of the hot areas of research in this membrane field is to develop multi-process high permeability flux membranes. That means the membrane is not just a filter, it can do disinfection, decontamination, separation, all these different processes at the same time. So if we can develop such a filter, then it will be a quantum leap in membrane-based water treatment. The rationale is simple. If multi-process high permeability flux membranes would reduce the required applied pressure, and therefore it will be a huge quantum leap in membrane-based water treatment. Um, so membranes are just polymeric filters or ceramic filters with some pores and so on. The material itself, like inherently prone to fouling or biofouling. It's basically all the material that's there in the water accumulate on the membrane and clog the pores. The reason is the material, these membranes are surface is rough. They have certain chemistry, surface chemistry. They sometimes promote sticking of the materials to the membrane surface. These materials are also prone to oxidation by chemicals like chlorine and so on. So all these things kind of reduce the efficiency of these membranes and also and overall the membrane process. So what we desire right now is a membrane that is fouling resistant and a membrane that can resist oxidation by chlorine and something similar chemical agents. So if we can achieve that kind of a membrane material, it will improve the reliability and energy efficiency of membrane processes. It will reduce the use of chemicals for cleaning all that clogged material. It will also reduce pretreatment energy and costs. So in addition to the membrane, like how can you make this membrane more multifunctional? So that's where this nanotechnology comes into picture. So we also use this nanotechnology to transform this a passive filter into an active filter. So nanotechnology is nothing but it's the control of matter at dimensions of approximately 1 to 100 nanometers, where 1 to 100 nanometers, these are extremely tiny particles, where unique phenomena arising from its size enable novel applications. These nanomaterials are applied in every field that you can think of. My focus is on this water treatment systems. So they are increasingly used and studied for water treatment. They are used in solar energy. There are used in so the car here is it's called iBMW car. This whole infrastructure is made out of carbon nanotube based in composite fiber materials. So again, nanotechnology is in your cell phones and so on. There are a lot of interesting applications are associated with these materials. Size of the materials enabling unique properties and applications. So these particles at their extremely small size, they exhibit some extraordinary properties like produce high amounts of reactive oxygen species. These are like oxidants. Some materials have enhanced adsorption properties, absorption properties. There are so many physical, chemical, and properties that can be kind of developed or engineered into these materials at that particular small size. So just to give you an analogy, so if you think of a dog, and if you shrink the size of the dog to very, very, very small, then the dog will kind of transform into a cat. So the material, like the material at that small scale, exhibit very different, very unique properties. So we study these properties at that small scale and try to use it to develop new treatment processes or improve existing treatment processes and so on. So that's where this nanotechnology plays a huge role. In my lab, what we do is, for example, we take the membrane, this passive filter as a platform, and put nanomaterials on it to engineer some properties into the material. So we take nanomaterials with targeted properties to create reactive surface. We employ the basic chemistry principles like covalent ionic or electrostatic interactions to functionalize nanomaterials to the surface of the membrane. The goal here is to make these materials that are sitting on the membrane like irreversible, and the process should be non-destructive and use as little nanomaterial as possible to create this reactive surface. And more importantly, these unique particles, we want to make them surface available so that they produce this reactive surface for the treatment purposes. Here is an example where we studied the efficiency of the filter in terms of filtration. So here we are kind of measuring the resistance to the water flow through the filter. That's RM is plotted on the y-axis, and this is the days of biofouling or filtration. So we are comparing a clean membrane without any nanomaterials with the membrane coated with the nanomaterials. So the clean membrane, the resistance to water flow increased with time because there is so much of biofoulants, the bacterial matter that accumulated on the filter, blocking the water flowing through the membrane. So that increased the resistance to the water flow. But the membrane that's coated with the nanomaterials, we don't see much accumulation of bacteria on the surface. These are anti-biofouling nanomaterials. So these materials kept the membrane a little cleaner, so the water was able to flow through very easily without much resistance. So this is the kind of membrane that we are trying to develop or make them more efficient in terms of filtration and so on. Another area that we are also looking at is studying the nanomaterial itself. Like I just told you, some nanomaterial properties are well known, some are not yet known. So we engineer these nanomaterials to the nanoscale and then try to study their properties. And once we discover those properties, then we think of how can we use these new properties to treat our waters and wastewaters. Here is an example of fullerene nanoparticle. This is a buckyball. These buckyballs have a unique property. They can be excited with sunlight. When they're excited with sunlight, they produce oxidants like singlet oxygen. We can also tune the water chemistry around these particles. And when the water chemistry is tuned, they also produce hydroxyl radicals and superoxide radicals. So what can we do with these radicals, these new oxidants? We can use it to kill bacteria, we can use it to degrade some of the pollutants, persistent organic pollutants, and so on. So there are so many things that we can do, but there's a lot of research going on how to maximize the production of different oxidants to target different contaminants in the water. So in this particular study, we studied the effect of buckyball, the size of the buckyballs, and the surface chemistry or surface functional groups, how these different modifications affect the production of this singlet oxygen, which has the potential to kill viruses. So we took a MS2 virus, which is a surrogate for human enteric virus. This is also used as a water quality indicator. And we found that the amine functionalized fullerene nanoparticles are able to produce high amount of singlet oxygen, and therefore resulted in high inactivation of this virus. So that's what this plot is showing. This log inactivation is plotted on the y-axis, and the exposure of these viruses to these different nanomaterials is plotted here. In about as you can see, this green line shows the highest inactivation rate compared to the other nanomaterials or the control. The control is there is no photosensitization, there is no sunlight activation here. So, well, like by studying these nanomaterials, we found that the size is an important parameter. Also, the surface chemistry, they play a huge role in the interactions between the virus and the nanoparticles and the production of oxidants like singlet oxygen. So we study these kind of materials and try to incorporate into the treatment systems to kill viruses and bacteria, whatever we desire. We can engineer these materials to do that to achieve that kind of functionality. Again, this is a big like a major goal in our lab, try to create a multi-barrier membranes. By multi-barrier in the sense that like take a filter which is about 100 microns in thick, and the surface is coated with anti-fouling materials that resist clogging or blocking the pores. And there are some other additional nanomaterials that we can place on the other side of the filter. So there are three barriers here: nanomaterial barrier, membrane filter barrier, and a different kind of nanomaterial barrier. This conceptual diagram, what it is showing is, if some contaminants or some viruses which are very, very small, this virus is about 25 nanometers in size or 28 nanometers, if they pass through the filter, there is this additional barrier which can be activated with light to kill these viruses, for example, that escape this filter. So we can by if we can develop this kind of a filter, then we can harness a lot of benefits out of it. So the the goal is, like right now this is how big the drinking water treatment plant looks like. But if we can develop this kind of multi-barrier treatment plant, can be shrunk into this into one single room where different filters will be doing different treatments, scrubbing off different constituents in the water or disinfecting different pathogens in the water. So that's the advantage of these kind of membrane filters. So in conclusion, the real gains in energy efficient water treatment process can be realized with the development of multi-process nanoparticle membrane systems, and nanomaterials with chemically tailored surfaces can improve the anti-fouling, disinfection, and decontamination properties of water and wastewater treatment membranes. So the combination of these two technologies has a great promise, and it can potentially transform the landscape of clean water and sanitation. And with that, I will stop. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Badireddy. I think we might actually hold on questions just to make sure that all of our panelist members have a chance to go, and then do our questions for as much time as we have left there. So if you have any questions, be sure to write them down. I am running out of sticky notes. Didn't plan on that one. So I think with that, we will go to Dr. Scarborough next. Dr. Scarborough, his research on the application of microbiomes to protect the natural environment and public health. He's currently working on the management of wastes from agricultural processes to convert renewable feedstocks to valuable feedstocks. With this work, he hopes to provide farmers with additional revenue while also reducing their air and water pollution. And as I recall, agriculture stands to be a very large proponent of air and water pollution, at least in the US. And with that, I open the floor to you.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for the introduction, Kelsey. It's good to be here. My internet, I think, might be having some issues, so bear with me. Let me know if I drop off, and I'll try and fix that. But I'm on my phone hotspot now. I think maybe we'll be okay. So I chatted with Kelsey a little bit this morning, and she said didn't need to have slides, and I was kind of intrigued by trying to give a talk without slides, so I'm just going to go for it. But I do have one image I might want to share. So we'll try that down the line. But I'm going to do this talk in 3 parts. So one, I want to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. 2, I want to talk about my research. I want to talk about microbes and how we use them to sort of clean up after humans. And 3, I want to talk about some of the societal issues that go into sort of some of these technologies that we might want to implement, and sort of some lessons learned. So with that, I will start with number 1, and that's just talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm assuming that you're having multiple panels for different development goals. Is that right? Okay, cool. And we were invited here to talk about, I think, clean water and providing access to sanitation. And Dr. Badireddy was hitting on this, but I think what you'll find as you listen to all these panels is that these are all very interconnected development goals, right? So where I put myself is kind of with sort of feed into clean water and sanitation, but then also looking at sustainable food sources, and also providing good health and well-being, and providing local sources of income and economic sustainability as well. So when I think about the Sustainable Development Goals, I mean, it's kind of hard to separate them in my mind. I know it's good to sort of compartmentalize all these things, but my work is very much a mush, it feels like, of a lot of them. So to that end, my background is in wastewater treatment. So historically, I worked in consulting for 7 years, designing and building wastewater treatment plants. I think in that process, especially working in consulting, one thing that struck me a lot was we think that the United States is doing a really good job. And we are in a lot of ways, but I was kind of amazed when I got out of undergrad. The first project that I worked on was for the city of Omaha, Nebraska, of all places. And they had what we called combined sewers. And what that means is that stormwater and wastewater, what you flush down the toilet, goes into the same pipe. And if it's not raining, that's actually kind of a good thing. If it's not raining a lot, that's actually kind of a good thing, because you're actually collecting your stormwater off the road, sending it to the wastewater treatment plant. The problem is when it rains a lot, you need somewhere for all that water to go. And in a lot of these cities that built their collection systems, in the early 1900s up to the 1940s, they decided the best option was one pipe for stormwater and for sewage. So in the 1990s, the EPA started, cracking down on these combined sewer systems. And when I went to Omaha, they still had combined sewers, and when it rained, they would send a lot of sewage out into the Missouri River. And this happened about 120 times a year. So that's alarming in and of itself, and I don't mean to be an alarmist, but I thought it was very striking. But the project I was specifically working on, and I worked on this project for almost 6 years, so when it rained, the sewage would go out to the river, and that was bad enough. But Omaha, you should probably think of steaks, Omaha steaks, and they still have a very big meat packing operation. So I spent a lot of time in meat packing facilities. Didn't eat meat for a long time, and the real kicker was when it rained, not just our sewage would go out to the rivers, but this meat packing wastewater would also go out to the rivers. And so one of the early projects in that in their big program to stop CSOs, as we call them, was to separate out and treat at least that high strength industrial wastewater so it wasn't going to the river. And so that was a bit of a humbling, perhaps, experience, knowing that, I mean, in the United States, still we're dealing with certain conditions that require us in certain circumstances to send sewage out into our water bodies. So when I was working, I got really interested in microbiology. So we use microbes a lot in wastewater treatment. So if you're in Burlington, I think maybe some of you are, when you send water down the drain, it goes to a wastewater treatment plant. And one of their biggest processes there is something that we call activated sludge. And it's a whole bunch of microbes that are essentially going to break down the organic matter that's in our wastewater. So in these processes, we provide oxygen to the microbes. The microbes will eat waste, break it down. They do release CO2. And then we also have specialized microbes that will help us capture all the phosphorus and then settle out. So this is how we can remove phosphorus largely from wastewater too. So it's not ending up in Lake Champlain. So in the wastewater world, we've sort of used microbes for about 120 years. We didn't always kind of know what was going on, but we knew that if we grew biofilms and ran water over it, we could clean up water. And by biofilm, I mean microbes just kind of growing on rocks. So the earliest wastewater treatment systems were essentially just big rock filters. We still have them. We call them trickling filters. But there's microbes that would grow and help us clean up wastewater. But the history goes back a lot further than that, where humans have been using microbes, and it actually to treat waste. And actually, Marco Polo in the 13th century, yes, described in China where they would take pig manure and they'd cover it and they'd use gas generated from pig manure to heat and run the stoves so they could produce this combustible gas. And that in the 13th century was the earliest description that I know of for anaerobic digestion, which is a process that we're still using today to recover valuable products. So in addition to using microbes to clean up our waste, we can also use microbes to convert waste into usable products. And that's what my research focuses on. So also sort of on the background of all of this work, I think you've all heard of microbiomes, right? So we're all good with microbiomes now. We like yogurt, we like drinking kombucha, all that good stuff. Good. So it's no surprise then that the human microbiome has been a topic of big conversation, and we're just now getting these sorts of tools that allow us to really probe and understand what's going on in these microbial communities. And so in the natural environment, in wastewater treatment plants, in anaerobic digesters, so these really complex systems of microbes that are all kind of working together or duking it out. And as an environmental engineer, I kind of try and find ways to direct those microbes to do what we want them to do, while simultaneously being happy enough to keep doing it. So it's kind of this fine game I play. And that's sort of at the heart of my research. So what I want to share, if I can share something, let me see. I might need help, sorry.
That's all right. If you can't get it to present, you can also send it to me via email and I can present it on the screen for you. That worked in previous times.
There is
Okay,
like a
yeah.
present now in the right corner if you can see that.
in the right corner.
Yeah, below. Yeah.
Let me see here.
Like a square with an
Oh,
up
yeah, here we go.
arrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm just going to share my entire screen here for a second. Chrome wants to share the contents. Yeah, I would like to do that. Share. Okay. So you can probably see my face. Can you see this diagram?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So I want to give an example of, this is actually a process flow diagram of an anaerobic digestion facility that I visited on Tuesday. And this is one that is going in Salisbury, Vermont at Goodrich Farms. And what they're doing here is they're taking cow manure and they're using this cow manure along with some food waste to produce biogas. And they do this through a two-stage microbial process. In the first stage, they're using microbes to break down all the complex organics. In the second, they're relying on a microbial community to basically convert the organic waste into methane and CO2. And then what they do is they capture this biogas, we call it. And then here at this facility, they actually clean this biogas up through this scrubbing process to remove everything essentially but the methane. And they have coming out natural gas that's about 97% methane. And they're going to be feeding that gas actually to Middlebury College to use for heating, primarily for heating. So the other thing they're going to do in this process, so this is sort of where, you know, they're starting with all this high strength organic material, producing biogas. But the other nice thing about this process is it allows us to take the liquid and we can start separating out the phosphorus and the nitrogen. And what this allows us to do is, starting with cow manure, instead of just spreading cow manure on fields, we can make these dedicated nutrient sources. And so back to what Dr. Badireddy was saying, a lot of the fertilizers we put on fields end up running off and end up in our water system. These, if you can break them out, you have more control over when and where you put these individual nutrients, which we can hopefully use to help reduce the amount of runoff that we're getting. And so I spent a lot of time studying these systems, specifically on farms in Vermont, but we're starting to look at downsizing these systems too. So Goodrich Farms has about 900 cows, and economy of scales help for these sorts of processes. But we're also looking at implementing a similar process at farms about the size of Shelburne Farms. So looking at about 80 cows. And if we can get a process that's packageable, it's something that we hope that we can implement in farms of all size, where we can basically start with cow manure, produce biogas, and also provide two nutrient-rich fertilizer streams. And so that's, in a nutshell, what my research focuses on. And in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, I think you can see if anything we can do to take waste and make something that we can reuse, make something that would otherwise be derived from fossil fuels, gets us headed in the right direction. And so I'm going to stop sharing. I hope the diagram was helpful. Then I'll come back here. So let's see. I'm trying to look at all of you now. Show everyone. Okay, that'll work. And so the last thing I wanted to talk about briefly was just a little bit of some of the other issues, not just technological issues, that go into meeting these Sustainable Development Goals. So I've been a long time, I took a little break, but a long time member of the group called Engineers Without Borders. And that group, it's mostly made up of students, but there's also professional engineering chapters. And these students, I would say in the early 2000s, so when I first started a chapter at the University of Wyoming, and there were about a dozen chapters at the time. Now there's hundreds. And they always, well, we've learned, we as an organization, I would say, we Engineers Without Borders, has learned a lot over that time in terms of what it takes to actually implement these technologies. And one of the stories that one of the initial Engineers Without Borders projects was sort of this token development project where engineers went to Uganda, they built a well, they got it fired up. Now, instead of having to travel 7 miles a day to collect water from the nearest freshwater source, there was a well. It would save everybody a bunch of time and it would be great. And so when this group put in the well, they went back on their assessment trip about a year later. And what they found was that the well wasn't being used and it wasn't operable. And when they asked why, it was primarily because the women that were in this village that they were serving really liked going on walks to the local water source every day. And it gave them time to be with the kids and their friends away from the men. And nobody ever asked them. And, you know, it's come a long way. I think that we're starting to think about considering the societal impacts of our work and knowing that we can't just go willy-nilly around the world and implement cool technologies and assume that they'll keep working. It really relies on continuous partnerships with some of these areas that need them the most, coupled with education, and coupled with really providing value to these communities and understanding what the community values in the first place. So I will end with that. And I guess we'll wait for questions, but if you have any questions, let me know at some point.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Scarborough. And now we'll move on to Dr. Wolf, who appears to be having some camera problems, but I think we're getting there.
I am having some camera problems, and I'm not. That storm also just rolled through here.
Gotcha.
I got some flickering, and now I can't seem to get my camera back. So maybe it would be easiest if I try to pop back in and see if that works, and if that's okay, because every time I'm hitting this camera button, it's not coming on. So I will be back in just one moment, and I'll see if I can fix this.
Alrighty, no problem. I guess while we wait for her to come back, I will introduce her, and then maybe she'll pop in like a wrestler does. All right, where were we? Her area, Dr. Kristen Wolf, also has areas of expertise that include wetland ecology, biogeochemistry, and apiculture. She runs the Champlain College apiary over here in the summers. We sell that honey in our bookstore, and I think a little bit online, but I'm not entirely certain. And she is also a faculty member of the Governor's Institutes of Vermont Environmental Science and Technology Science Program, where she guides stream ecology studies. All right, and how's that? Any better, Dr. Wolf?
Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
All right, I apologize. Yeah, I've hit this button enough times that it's it's not working for me. So if you do you mind looking at the K as I talk through this? I don't have slides, so maybe in the end it was okay. Kelsey, I'll leave it up to you. Do we want to troubleshoot at all, or should I just go for it?
You could just go for it. It's not, you know, if you don't have slides, then I guess it's not super important that we see your face. Although, of
Sure.
course, that would be preferable.
Maybe
But
what I'll do, what I'll do is I'll try to share a screen and then come back and see if that doesn't, I don't know, reboot my camera.
is your camera attached?
It is, yeah. So I usually don't. This has never happened before.
Of course
Anyway,
not.
I'll talk through it and then maybe I can come back and troubleshoot afterwards. So thank you. And I love to hear both of these presentations. One, because reverse osmosis was like the first graduate school project I ever had. And Professor Badireddy, to see how far it's come is just amazing to me because all the problems that you described, the fouling and the the cost and energy costs associated with it were like something that kind of took it off the list of what could be possible. And now, to see that work is very exciting. I also sugar. So we have a little reverse osmosis pump that I now get to have some interaction with that technology. And that said, too, Dr. Scarborough, interesting, and I'm glad that you started with the Sustainable Development Goals, because I've engaged with them mostly through beekeeping. So water resources for me was work that I did with the U.S. Geological Survey that I've always continued an interest in. But I like the way that the Sustainable Development Goals frame global problems and require interdisciplinarity in order to fix them. So I'll say too, beginning with combined sewer overflow, I'm from Pittsburgh, and we had some serious combined sewer overflow issues for a long time. I think at one point we had like the highest E. coli content in our surface waters that we were drinking. So yeah, maybe go ahead.
I'm from Pittsburgh too, so
Are you
just thought I'd
really? No
interject with
way.
that. Yeah, we should talk about this then.
Yeah,
But
South
yes,
Hills.
indeed, another CSO community.
Yes. So yeah, Pittsburgh, I almost feel like my interest came from all the time we spent wringing our hands about water problems in Pittsburgh. So anyway, yeah, interesting connections there. And too, with the biological oxidation work that goes on. I worked for Bayer for a while in Germany working on chemical oxidation. And so all of these treatment methodologies, I always figured that I would end up in wastewater treatment. And then I went kind of the other way into the more ecological realm of wetlands and recharge and things. So I love being able to see, in the last 10 years, how far these technologies have come in order to, if we're thinking about water scarcity, especially, being able to recycle this water in a way that's energy efficient and the like. So I think for me, where I can kind of fill in the blanks, as I said, I've moved more into the ecological realm. So maybe two points that I want to make. One on water quality. I worked in water quality through wetlands, and so it's great that we have these technologies. It's also interesting to look at how robust the landscape is in being able to replenish water supplies, clean water supplies, and kind of maintain the balance of these of water output features. And so the work that I was doing at when I was at George Mason and with the U.S. Geological Survey was mostly looking at how riparian areas and the importance of keeping riparian buffer areas intact. And asking a larger question, because if you look at the policies under the Clean Water Act, no net loss of our wetlands became very important with George H.W. Bush administration, and they enforced this no net loss wetland policy. If you look a little bit of the history of it, the colonial drainage, during colonial times, the drainage of wetlands was pretty massive in order to develop. And with losing more than 50% of our wetland resources and knowing how important they are both to water quality and as habitats, the no net loss was something that put into effect to make sure that we weren't losing the remaining 50% of those wetlands that we had, coastal and interior wetlands. So our work was kind of centered around that, because with no net loss policy, it was difficult for development to justify drainage unless there were, certain systems in place that you were able to either buy wetland credits, put wetlands elsewhere. And so the trial and error of that policy was, I think, a little bit hard in the beginning, in that you could develop. I was also living at this point in Loudoun County, which had the highest development rate in the nation year after year. This is in Virginia. So trying to figure out, both with private industry and research institutions, can you make wetlands? The idea that we were using land elsewhere in different watersheds even, and it was old agricultural land, and seeing if you could develop a wetland somewhere where you wanted to develop and then recreate those wetlands elsewhere was kind of a fascinating proposition that had a lot of resources and money entangled into it as well. So what we were interested in is, can you like come back to a space of like wetland functionality, and recreate this and restore certain wetlands to have better ecological function, so that they were doing all of the important denitrification and phosphorus loading work that natural wetlands do. And it was fascinating that when I say the trial and error periods, it's hard to make a wetland. If you have a farm field and you create the proper topography for that one, find a way to seal that water in, and recreate the hydrology, and in addition have the right wetland plants so that you have the ecological capacity to house original wetland organisms and the like, and create that habitat. It's kind of a tall order. So working in that for a while, and my own takeaways, is that one, if you can restore hydrology, there is a way to do this, right? Creating some of this wetland habitat so that we can have better water quality. It has to be done in the sub watershed in which the harm occurs, right? So we have this balancing act, and that maybe that seems like it goes without saying, but if you're going to protect a watershed, you need to be protecting those watersheds in kind, and in the area of the sub watershed, so that water quality is not impacted too heavily somewhere, and then you just go out where land is cheap and build a bunch of wetlands and sell them off as wetland credits. So we all like these market systems where we can kind of cap and trade our way to an environmental cleanliness as a whole. But thinking about, again, ways that you can be doing treatment where treatment needs to be done so that water quality is not so heavily impacted, as almost hot zones, is something to consider. So working through that one, the hydrology is hard to do, and overall, preventing, I think, the need for development, or being smarter about development, was something that had to work in kind with this, because you find that it is very hard to restore and to recreate wetland habitats. It's hard to do that really with any natural habitats. So are there better ways that we can prevent the type of development, that, or better put, perhaps, think about it more holistically, so that our water resources are being protected more vigorously, than having to create some type of system that is really suboptimal at best. So it was an interesting learning experience, because I think, as I said, those market systems are quite helpful, but using that science to affect policy, and recognizing how difficult it is, in fact, to do that, not impossible, but hard to do, really set policy priorities elsewhere in preserving wetlands, over creating and the restoration work that takes place. So it's good to have a multifunctional tool set, that we have all of these things available. But I think some of the initial heartache in trying to create wetlands was something that was really eye-opening for everyone. So yeah, that on water quality. And then as far as water quantity goes, this is anecdotal, because the work that I do is in beekeeping. So I'm interested in sustainable livelihoods in the Amazon rainforest. And specifically, we look at sustainable development goals through the ability to have culturally and ecologically sensitive opportunities for individuals, and supplemental income as it has to do with beekeeping. So I know this isn't about beekeeping. Every time I talk, Kelsey's had me before in class, so she knows that bees always enter into this. But where I'll make the water connection is that a lot of these rainforest communities have been very, very heavily impacted by climate change. and with specific regards to their water resources. If we understand that climate change is going to impact the distribution of water, and especially if you are using a river system like the rainforest communities that we work with, the Amazon is a lifeline, right? It's a lifeline for transport, for food, for water, and just for a basic livelihood. So when you are food and transport insecure in these places, and especially with the impacts of climate change exacerbating the flood drought cycle and the insecurity that that creates, this is something that for all the beekeeping work you can come in and do, this is really more front and center for individuals. And when you look at the river systems and consider the connectivity of this, that one, the Amazon River Basin is generating these weather patterns and climate systems, not just locally, but globally. And you consider things like, snowpack from the Andes that is waning and how these weather systems are being affected. When you have very drastic flooding, that creates that food insecurity. And then on the converse, when you have droughts and the food insecurity that that creates, but also that some of these communities have been completely cut off because they can't reach the main stem river. This, as I said, kind of exacerbates, and these problems compound themselves. So the work that needs to be done on that, I'll go back to the beginning, the need for an interdisciplinary look at this, that there are water resources. And again, Dr. Badireddy, as you talk about the energy, food, and water systems and how those things are interconnected, really is the truth of it. And with climate change putting such immense pressure on each one of those systems, you find in some cases you can have that perfect storm. And I think too, as we think about these issues, and I wanted to also bring in Dr. Scarborough, your the Engineers Without Borders comment that you made. When we're doing sustainable development work, we've had past projects that we have been working with as well, and the adoption of certain technologies to help with this is something that really does require collective partnerships. And when you think of the adoption of these technologies, I'll throw out as anecdotal evidence as well. Some of the communities we had worked with, there were rainwater flush toilets that were installed, which people were pretty excited about when they first came. And then you come back year after year and see that they are used less and less and less. And when there's finally a question about this, it's something as simple as not having access to toilet paper, right? There's no toilet paper, and if there's no toilet paper, there's not really a need for this concrete structure rainwater flush toilet that is attached to one of the outbuildings or community buildings. So it's that these are problems that are more easily addressed the more voices that you have. And so the integration of what you need, both interdisciplinarity and the interdisciplinarity that is required, but also with that, the immense effort that has to go into being devoted to participatory development is something that can't be overstated. So yeah, that's basically kind of the gaps anyway that I can fill in ecologically. And yeah, I think that's it. So I'm going to play around with my camera a little bit more because it's hard to be looking at my own K on the screen. But yeah, if I jump out and in again for questions, know that I'm trying. Okay. So thank you.
Alrighty, thank you very much. We'll now move into questions. I, of course, will leave it open to students if they have questions to go first. I have a few written down on like 5 sticky notes, just a beautiful mind style on my desk. Oh! So we've got that going. Go ahead if you have questions you'd like to ask. I'm perfectly willing to wait.
Yeah, definitely. I want to ask Dr. Badireddy about. I had 9 questions for you, but I was thinking about it, and I'll only ask one.
Okay.
And the last one is most important, actually. So, what do you see as the steps of making nanofabrication more affordable for developmental countries or for laboratories that don't have the same technology as, like, the Max Planck Institute?
Mhm. Again, if we want to take these nanomaterial based technologies to developing countries, I think the one of the first things that we need to address is its environmental implications or the health implications. Most of the nanoparticles are known to leach off from these the engineered systems, and some of them are known to be toxic. But if that's going to happen, then these technologies will not fly. So we are the community is actively working on trying to figure out ways to immobilize and at the same time achieve the functionality these nanomaterials can kind of deliver. So for example, like if you look at the titanium dioxide nanoparticle, they are already being applied to treat air pollution. For example, there is I forgot the name of the stadium in Brazil. There's a huge stadium, a soccer stadium that accommodates 30,000 people on a game day. So that whole stadium is coated with titanium dioxide based paint. The idea is like when the stadium is full, these there will be a lot of carbon dioxide and other pollutants, so this titanium dioxide can remediate these things. So there it's being applied, and titanium dioxide it's only active when it is excited with the sunlight. So again, like for example, these carbon nanotubes are already being used in the aerospace industry and other car manufacturing industry and so on. The there is a problem with the regulations too right now, the way they define what is a nanoparticle and what is not. And there is a loophole there where the industries have figured out that, so instead of calling them carbon nanotubes, now they call it as a carbon fibers. If it is called as a carbon fiber, it's okay to use it. So the industries are already using it, but we know if when these nanotubes kind of leach off and bioaccumulate, there are some toxicity associated with it. So before these can be applied, taken to the real world, it's already there in the real world. Like for example, this antibacterial socks, it's coated with silver. People who like it, they buy it. Sounds cool, but the silver leach off and it has some ecotoxicity associated with it. We haven't reached to that point where that balance that needs to be achieved, but it's already there. People are using it. The electronics have graphene in there, the cell phones has graphene, but then the e-waste comes into picture. Some technologies are already there, but as an environmental engineer, I'm really concerned about the how much of that material is out there, how much gets into the environment, what is the toxicity associated with it. There is toxicology is out there, people are working on it, but it's going to be there. Yeah.
Bodies and nanofabrication and
I can't hear you.
What?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
How about now? Perhaps my Wi-Fi is also glitching.
Or is it me? Seems to be.
Can you guys hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear, but I can't
both
hear
now,
you.
yeah.
Okay.
You could also try typing your question in the chat if that makes it easier.
How about now?
I think I am having the same problems as Kate. Maybe I have to log off and log in then.
Okay.
I can type my question. Oh, okay. Okay. How do I close the chat? There we go. Well, the next question. Okay.
Oh, here we go.
Let me think. Oh. Can you hear me?
No, I can't hear you.
Oh no.
Technology.
So reliable.
Good enough to inject into brains, but not good enough to talk over the internet.
He could read lips, though.
I guess if you don't mind, Stephen, I had a question that sort of builds off of yours. is for Dr. Scarborough. I had a question about what you were talking about your work in Omaha in their wastewater system in terms of, it being out of date. And I was wondering what you would think it would cost in terms of time, materials, and manpower to replace filtration systems that are poor in different towns like Omaha, nationally or even globally.
Oh, it's a massive undertaking. So, man, the city of Omaha, which isn't a huge city, they have a program, they call it. So a lot of these big, massive projects, they throw all the consulting firms in the city at and kind of let them all deal with it for a couple decades. So this was I think it will at the end of the day be about a 30-year project with a $2 billion with a B dollar price tag. And that's for separating out sewers and upgrading different systems. And that's Omaha, so it's not a massive city. So usually cities that size and bigger, we're talking about billions of dollars. I wish I knew what Pittsburgh spent on theirs. But it was also a very massive undertaking in terms of time, people, and materials. The good news in Omaha and in a lot of these programs, they will try to keep the labor local. So that is another advantage. I mean, they do put a lot of people to work, but it's huge. I mean, anytime you're talking about digging up sewer pipes all over a city, you're talking about digging up every city block, all the streets, dealing with all the other infrastructure that's underground. It's massive, as you might guess.
I think too, if I can jump in,
Yeah.
when you consider that, water access and equity issues, which we've talked a little bit less about, but the move to privatize, and a deeper question of water ownership, when you see the capital that has to be put into these types of infrastructure changes, you're not raising this money in major cities, let alone in low-income countries. And so that move to have, global water conglomerates come in because they have the money and then raise rates, seems like a good option sometimes, right? So some type of private and public entity. But then, of course, there's a water justice issue associated with that. So it's a very costly undertaking.
Yes. It's yeah. Does that help? Does that answer your question, Cassie?
Yeah.
Okay.
I imagined it would be a kind of up in the air question. I mean, we have still haven't dealt with things like the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. They're still without water, and it's been well over a decade.
I gave a lecture about the Flint water crisis this afternoon.
Ooh.
And it's I mean, we could talk about it another time. That deserves its own time. But yeah, they're as you know, they're still just finding the lead service lines. I don't know how much you know the system, but even that is a massive undertaking in and of itself, because when they were installed, there weren't great records kept of where these different pipes were going. So they expected to find about 20,000. They've dug up and replaced 9,700 so far, and they're still primarily relying on exploratory digging up of people's yards to find these pipes. And you can actually look up and find papers where they've tried to apply machine learning and different computational analyses to try and guess where these pipes are. But honestly, it seems like somebody with a shovel is still about as good as we can do there. But the Flint's a whole nother deal. Yeah. So, but you're right. And that's, I mean, we have a lot of privilege in this country, but the privilege is not adequately distributed, and it's amazing what you can find in the United States in terms of environmental justice issues, if you look for them.
Mm-hmm. I also had a question for Dr. Wolf. You talked about people making functional wetlands and in order to replace things that they would lose in terms of development. I was wondering what exactly makes a wetland considered to be functional? Like what sort of there must be some legal criteria in place to determine yes, this is working and it's functional.
Yeah, and yes, the Army Corps of Engineers is in charge of wetland delineation. So taking some of the criteria of that, having the proper hydrology, as I mentioned, is very hard to recreate, and but imperative to having a wetland. So that's probably the most functional attribute is standing water and the soils that develop because of that standing water. And then from there, if you think of kind of the layered landscape of hydrology being first, and then the soil composition, and then finally the plants that you find on top in those floral surveys, so that you're having a mix of obligate and facultative wetland plants, so that it can be identifiably a wetland. The connection to these water sources, as I said, if that's what you're going to be using as filtration for especially nitrogen and phosphorus runoff. It's that functional capacity is mostly gained by making sure that the wetland is connected, and it's hard to reconnect riparian wetlands. I mean, they can be flooded, but having the deeper groundwater hydrology and that hydrologic connection, and thinking about again where they fall within the watershed, because it's not all created equally. I mean, there are reasons that you had wetlands fall where they were in the first place, and so to put them in drier areas is something that would be helpful if the hydrology would cooperate, we'll say. You know, how you make water flow in you know, in the places that you want it to, but yeah, hard to do.
So can I answer some of Stephen's questions?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, Stephen, and I see all your question in the chat box. You know, it's a very good question. You know, I see the chemical engineer in you. It's kind of concerned about this nanobodies and nanofabrication and so on.
Yeah.
Let me kind of talk about this nano. I think with any new technologies, when something new comes, people are really scared about it. The same thing with the GMOs, right? When GMO was like, people are all kind of thinking about all the negative consequences and so on. But now it became, there are a lot of foods there out there with GMO label and so on. I think it's going to be something similar, but it's on the community to ensure that these nanoparticles are not toxic and so on, or to make sure these particles have the properties that we desire. At the same time, they're not harmful to the environment. So that's where the engineering comes into picture, to make sure these are kind of well incorporated and and kind of deliver whatever the applications they are designed for. Yeah, you're right. These materials at the moment, and it depends on the type of nanomaterial. Say, for example, if you are looking to buy carbon nanotubes, the way they are manufactured, it's a very expensive process, and it's chemical vapor deposition they use to make these nanomaterials. But compared to 10 years ago, the nanotubes now, they cost really cheap. They are very cheap right now. But again, not everybody have access to that kind of technology. But I'm sure, in the next few years, the price will still go down. So again, let's see, the price of these nanoporous membranes and so on, they are coming down, and they will go down. And people are looking, like say, the benefit that comes out of these nanoporous membranes will be much outweighs the cost to make these membranes, the environmental. So for example, if we can make a membrane that is highly permeable and anti-fouling, for example, through the use of this nano technology, then for example, we will get a membrane ideally that is anti-clogging. At the same time, it is able to produce a lot of extract water from wastewaters. Then we have much higher benefit. But again, before that can be achieved, we have to make sure these materials stay in that system and then they don't leach off and so on. Um, Again, so and also because of these nanoscale properties, we are learning a lot about these materials, at the small scale, how they function and so on. So now we have these carbon nanotubes, these nanochannels. Now, because of these nanochannels, now see how the nanoscale systems in nature work. For example, probably you might have heard about aquaporins. Those are the protein channels that regulate water across roots and mangroves or leaves and so on. So they are also like nanotubes. They are highly selective for water. They're highly permeable and so on. So now these nanochannels, now people are able to extract them and put it on a membrane. And now they are able to extract extract water from all kinds of wastewaters. So now, and because of these aquaporine channels, now the membranes, you don't even have to apply pressure to push water through. So we call this as a forward osmotic membranes, but it's like a biomimetic membranes. So we can have very highly contaminated water on one side and a saline water on the other side, and we can let the water pass from highly contaminated to the water on the other side, a saline solution. So this knowledge, at the fundamental knowledge, at the nanoscale, is enabling some new technologies. So once we kind of understand and engineer the systems, I think it would be the benefit that comes out of these materials would be huge.
Most definitely.
So yeah, go ahead.
I guess my question wasn't really about the public health, but more about the legal side. With respect to let's say that you create a nanoporous membrane that does exactly what you want it to do, what you want it to do without any toxicity. My worry is the utilization of fresh water. Of course, we have bottled water companies now, but as we run out of fresh water and we start to use these technologies in developing countries or large corporations, large industries, we start to own that fresh water. How do you see patent law attempting to create a democracy around fresh water in the future? Can we create an open access freshwater platform with nanoporous technologies in the future?
Yeah, let's see.
Because right now in the United States, we're quite, even in patent law, we're quite individualistic. And especially as resources begin to decrease at a very worrisome pace, it's concerning, especially
Yeah. Like every new material that's created, people are patenting it, and it's very hard to kind of access it. One way to see it, I mean, like if you want to implement something that has been patented, it's going to be expensive, right? The corporations own it, but there is no choice there. But in some cases, there are some materials that can be synthesized by yourself and modify it, and you can develop technologies out of it. Some are easy to make, some are not. But again, if you want to get that high level benefit, I think still these kind of laws is hindering the progress, I would say, where they most need it, especially in the developing countries. But that's how it is right now. The big industries, kind of own some of these technologies and they're patented. I myself have patented some, again. So, but that's the scene now, right now. But I don't know how this thing will play out in the future. But yeah, so. But again, that's where understanding these, there is so much to learn from nature. If we can uh, understand these things and how nature is naturally doing these remediations or filtrations, so then we can kind of locally source those materials and modify and do treatment or recovery and so on.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Cool. I guess actually, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, just one last question.
Sure.
That's while I have you, I wanted to ask. I saw, I forget the name of your nanobody that was attacking the virus or blocking the virus, but perhaps I missed it. Is it doing that by blocking the spike protein?
Yeah.
Where? Oh, awesome. Okay.
Spike protein. Yeah. So now people are also working on biosensors for the COVID. That's also graphene based.
Wonderful. Cool. Go ahead.
It's there.
My question, I have two questions that are sort of I sort of have two questions that are sort of safety related, and one of them is for you, Dr. Badireddy, and kind of jumps off of Stephen's last question. It was about that particular graph you had in terms of oxygen
Mhm.
to a virus and how much, oxygen the virus is getting. I was wondering how much is considered, in general standards, safe in terms of the oxygen being reached to the virus? How much is considered publicly safe?
Oh, it is totally safe in the sense that these oxidants they have very short life. For example, if it's chlorine, we know about disinfection byproducts after the reactions with virus, bacteria, or organic matter. Disinfection byproducts produce, and then they stay there for a long time, right? But they indiscriminately attack anything that comes in contact, and their half-life is very short, so they disappear. So for continuous generation of these species, these nanomaterials needs to be there, and they will be generated only in the presence of light with that particular nanoparticle. So they can be sunlight or light activated, then they can be produced. Yeah. So
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah. And for my other question for Dr. Scarborough was about the storage and keeping of biogas. Obviously, I don't know much about it, but as I understand it, keeping and storing methane gas and similar, decaying gases can be somewhat dangerous. What kind of systems need to be put in place so that, your average company or your farm can store those in a safe manner so they can be properly used and split off to more safe, and then natural gas move to where it needs to go?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a big concern, and there are stories of digesters exploding that weren't built correctly. So I'll just be honest. But the controls that go into it, if it's done correctly, we engineer controls that if something fails, it'll fail safe. And if we have a leak somewhere, we have a way to capture that leak and sort of prevent any sort of combustible or any sort of combustion that would sort of result. It is definitely a concern, though, especially when you're talking about, if I want to build one of these on a farm, and the farmer wants to own and operate it, they need to be trained in how to deal with natural gas, for instance. So it's definitely a concern. I guess, like, without getting into the specifics of like the technologies that we can implement, I think natural gas as a whole, we've kind of got a handle on, but you still can read about natural gas pipeline explosions, and it's unfortunate, but it still happens. We have the controls. Are they always 100% effective? No. So sorry, that's not a real answer.
That's right.
Yeah.
Dr. Scarborough, I actually have
Yeah.
two for you. Are we running out of
Okay.
time? By the way, Kelsey?
Oh, we can go a little over if people don't have to rush off to anything. That's fine. And if anyone does have to leave for any reasons, it's absolutely fine. You can just duck out and go.
Yeah.
There are actually two short questions. Is
Okay.
there an Engineers Without Borders in Vermont?
Yes. So there's a UVM student chapter.
Mhm.
And I don't so it's just UVM right now. I don't know if they've ever reached out to other universities about comboing up or anything like that. It's certainly something I could suggest. But yes, there is one, and it is just a student chapter.
Oh, so non-students can't join?
Well, that's what I'm not. Well, so it's not a professional chapter. That's what I mean by that. So it's just students. I'm not saying you guys can't join. I think it's actually an interesting idea. I'll run it. I'm just going to ask them the students in it if they've ever reached out to other students in Burlington. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
I'm not a student right now, but I would love to get involved. I'm involved right now with
Well,
orders.
okay, cool. Well, they're always looking for folks to get involved and mentor as well. So if that's more up your line, I can get you in touch with the students and the current faculty advisor. So I'm the engineer in charge for it. They need a PE. It's a very like absurd title, but that's my role. But I could get you in touch with the faculty advisor. And they're
Awesome.
meeting on Teams right now. They meet almost like 4 times a week, but just one of those is like a general meeting. So
Cool.
certainly, I can get you in touch with the local chapter for sure.
That'd be great. Thank you. And actually, going off of that idea of following up with you, as you were talking, I was inspired by your comment of is this the right card? Yeah. Your comment like waste into a renewable resource, and bringing up the same technologies that you're talking about with farm-based waste could be used with plastic as well. I'm sure that since 2013, you've been seeing Dr. Strobel's work and all of this, fungal endotype.
Yeah. I mean, plastic is another interesting topic too. So I'm teaching a solid waste class right now, and we just wrapped up talking about plastic. So, you know, there's 2 sorts of camps. There's one, finding the right microbes that can degrade the plastic we're currently making. And then there's also coming at it from, let's produce plastics that are more biodegradable. And so I think, you know, there's some headway that can be made from both of those angles, and hopefully there will be. The fact is, though, we already have, to your point, we have a ton of plastic already with no place to put it. And all the societal issues of incineration aside, part of me always thinks if it wouldn't be better to just burn it and at least capture it, as long as we can treat the gas that's coming off in a way that prevents things like dioxane from getting into the environment, because it's a fossil fuel and at least we can reuse it again before we send it to the ocean. So anyways, that's my plastic thoughts in a nutshell. But I think, I mean, they have started looking for enzymes. I think we will make a lot of progress given the tools we have to sort of look at, you know, proteins that are being created in these different microbial communities by fungi, bacteria, all of them, to start really honing in on the enzymes. And then we can, you know, put these genes in the E. coli and have them make a whole bunch of this protein and then dump it in plastic and maybe it'll all disappear. It's certainly a nice idea.
Yeah, I mean, that 2015 endophyte that was discovered in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Polyethylene in 3 weeks, was it? And propane. Yeah.
Which would be awesome in Vermont. Take our plastic and turn it into propane. But yeah, it's one of so it's not something that I specifically study, but obviously it's really interesting. And I'm still convinced, like, the more we just dig into microbial communities and what nature has allowed fungi and bacteria to develop and start probing, I think we're going to come up with a lot of these sort of synthetic enzymatic cocktails that we can use to help us deal with waste and other things. So
yeah, nature is science and science is nature.
That's right.
Cool. Thank you. I would love to follow up with you about that later. That's been something I've been and also desalinization. I do work with halophytic agriculture, and desalinization is one of the biggest topics on my mind, especially with making it affordable.
Yeah.
Criterium.
Yeah.
And I also had 2 last questions for Dr. Wolf, and they're actually about apiology.
Yeah, apiculture, please.
Okay. So first is a linguistic question. So why is apiology about honeybees and melitology about general bees?
Yeah. So melitology, so there's a reference to honey and there's a reference to bees. And really where apiculture comes from is because we're working with the genus Apis mellifera, if we're talking about honeybees. Okay. And so for instance, like we also use mellipoculture, excuse me, for other bees, stingless varieties of bees, or trigona, or all these different genre of bees that you can have. That's where you get that plus culture. So that's where that comes from.
Awesome. Thank you. My Latin teacher and I, we always argued.
Yeah.
And then my second question was, I remember about how long has it been since I was an undergrad? Oh God, about like 4 years ago. There was a concern in pesticides and herbicides about having acetylcholine esterase inhibitors, and they were blocking bees' memory processes, and they couldn't find their way back to the nest or the hive. Have those been addressed in chemical engineering or whatnot? I'm not entirely sure what field handles pesticides, but
yeah, and this is another interesting like intersection of public policy and science, and actually an interesting lesson in science, I would say too, that if we're when you looked at some of the problems of neonicotinoids and systemic pesticides, and problems with then what was called colony collapse disorder, where you were having serious losses in honeybee colonies. I would say that through banning some of these pesticides, one on the public policy end, but then on the scientific research end, when we were doing original tests for neonics, they were looking at like, if you put this on a bee, it was like acute toxicity studies, and bees may not have been acutely it wasn't like insta death, right, when you were in contact with these neonics. The problem is that you have a bee that's a part of a greater colony and superorganism. And so when that bee comes back and you have bioaccumulation of those toxins and neonics, it gets into the next generation and the following generation. And so as that bioaccumulates in the colony itself, that you actually saw like second or third generations of bees that were having very serious, that were very seriously immunocompromised because of neonics. So there was a problem with the way that the studies were being done. And then when that was figured out, or parts of that were figured out, and you saw bans, and then you saw honeybee colonies coming back, there was kind of the try what works in public policy, see if it filters through in field studies, and there were some positive results there. But we don't, in the United States, the precautionary principle, especially when it comes to like industrial ag, is maybe lagging behind a little bit. We'll say to be very fair, generous even. So no, yeah, those problems are still out there.
Yeah, I always thought that the colony collapse would be the next Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, like the Silent Hive, for example.
We had Rowan Jacobson, I think it is, wrote "Fruitless Fall" about this. So, and spoke at UVM for the Eastern Apicultural Society a couple years ago for that book tour. So yeah, we're still riffing on that.
We'll have one for all the seasons.
Those are all the questions. Thank you.
I have one more for Dr. Wolf, and then I won't keep anybody too much longer. When you were talking about types of development near wetlands that can affect and impact wetlands, I was wondering if, and I'm pretty sure I might know the answer, it's probably industrial or something similar, but if there's a particular type of development that hurts environmental areas like wetlands more than others might.
Yes, I guess if there's more like polluting sources, but overall, if there's paved development and development in general that's going to require a draining of wetlands, you're going to lose that wetland no matter what you put there. So on-site capture is something that's people like now, especially as for stormwater retention properties. But yeah, it's more the actual draining of those spaces that is a problem. So development at large. So maybe it's better to have a housing complex that has a created wetland on site instead of a coal-fired power plant. So you're right to that we should think about what goes there. But overall, it's more that you're draining that wetland so that you can develop the space and put a building there that creates the problem.
Well, if there are no more questions, thank you all for attending, and thank you, panelist members, very much for taking time out of your days on a Wednesday to speak with us about your fields of expertise, and in particular, clean water and sanitation. I feel like I learned like a lot. I learned, I learned about membranes, and I learned about things they were doing in the agricultural section, and I learned about apiculture a little bit more because, as much as I go to the school that has an apiary, I don't often have the chance to visit it. So, it's always great to hear things that, you didn't really think of, as well as wetlands. Where I live, we have a beautiful bog, and people are very on it about things in the bog and even invasive species. You don't touch the bog. You don't touch it. You're not allowed. You can look at it.
Sacred ground. Can I say too, thanks for organizing this. And I really appreciate too having UVM representation, and it's nice to be working across the way and to see those faces in the research that's happening. So this was really interesting for me, and I love the EDDI collaborative efforts with UVM. So thank you for participating.
Thank you.
Did a thanks to Kelsey for organizing. This was awesome. I enjoyed my Wednesday evening quite a lot. Thanks for all the good questions, the thoughtful questions. We covered a lot of ground. I feel like I enjoyed this a lot. So good luck to you and your group, and keep having fun. And
thank you. One of the good things about this particular crisis is that I can ask people to join my event, and they don't have to do any travel, so they have no real excuse. Say no.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the great questions, Stephen. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Stephen.
Appreciate it a lot.
I will stop recording.